First question I want to ask with Nivedita ma'am that ma'am, how from where that idea comes to save the accused? That recently we saw the news that in RG Kar Medical College, some of the people came and they uh, they did lots of protest and they've broken lots of things. And on the other side, we also witnessed that in Kathua, in Jammu, where 8 years or 7 years old girl raped and against, after that, accused, in the favor of accused, some of the people protested to defend him. So from where that idea come? Is that idea come from the that we are in the we are supporter of the ruling party, or it's this idea come from a patriarchal mindset? And my second question goes. I want to ask to Arunima ma'am that. Uh, don't you think this the Bollywood movie and our society, and before saying before putting my question, I would like to apologize and say extremely sorry from my side to all the women and girls present here, that these some sort of negative words, that mal, pataka, bomb, these words, when they are when the male or people saying seeing to the pretty face or whatever they saying, and these things also these words also leading to the that kind of violence and uh, abuse for the harmful for the girls and women. Thank you.
Hello. So I want to ask, like, the in this recent case of rape in Kolkata, people's reaction is like, there are some authoritarian countries, like Islamic countries, who are having death penalties, and why not India is why India does not have such punishment. But this entire association with an authoritarian country, and to try adopt methods of acceptance to adopt those methods, it's not acceptable. And I want to ask, like, what according to you makes them acceptable to think that such kind of punishment is acceptable?
Hello, good evening, Professor. My name is Vedant. I am from CSRD. How big role does gender sensitization have in creating safe spaces, and what are the pragmatic ways for gender sensitization among all, which can really make a difference?
I want to add something to her question. As comparing to the democracy and the authoritarian regime, if we are looking in the context of the India, that as you talk about the certainty of the punishment, in the context of the Middle East countries, there are certainty of the punishment. If someone is found guilty of rape or anything, then he is beheaded or get the penalty of the death. But what about the India? There is a famous proverb कि तारीख पे तारीख लेकिन इंसाफ नहीं मिलता है. That's what I am just adding. Comparative analysis, is it because of the democratic form of government and the authoritarian or the monarchy form of government, or there is any other mechanical disturbance in the judiciary? So I want to add the comparative analysis between the democracy and the authoritarian regime in this context.
Okay, so the first question was about where does the impulse to protect the accused come from? And I think the answer was in your question in a way. You said, is it to protect the ruling party or is it because of patriarchal instincts? So, unfortunately, whichever the ruling party is, So I'm not even saying which party and which state. The fact is that if the accused is from a particular ruling formation, then the people of that formation, including many articulate women, will support that person. And so it is a combination of general power, general sense of this is my side and this is the other side, but also of the deep internalization of patriarchal values. So it's a combination of the two. So I can understand your saying. I mean, I can understand your puzzlement. It's like a puzzled question, but unfortunately, the fact is that I mean, the mob that attacked RG Kaur and tried to destroy evidence, etc., that was a trained mob. Okay, we have experienced that in JNU. It's like a planned attack. So that's a planned attack, and that's different from. That's at a political level. But actually, the fact is, and this is something I want to actually talk about also, I'm glad you asked the question. There is an impulse to protect the accused even among your friends. A woman who faces sexual harassment on this campus will not find all her women classmates supporting her or all the male classmates supporting her. There will be a way in which, so one of the impulses why women don't support women in sexual harassment cases is because of the good girl, good woman, bad woman thing, and you want to show I'm not like her. So you want to be on the side of the boys and to be on the winning side, and you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. So this is something we have to think about, and this actually ties up to the third question. In the next round, please say your names before you ask the question. So in the third question, you asked how does gender sensitization help, and I'm going to link up these two. That the kind of feminist future scenario that Arunima outlined is possible on a campus like this. And it is still there to some extent. It is possible if each one of us takes responsibility to speak up, to stand up, and we may not get justice from ICC, but as a social group, how do you boycott such people? How do you push them to the side? People who are sexual harassers. How do you keep the campus safe? Not through external security, but because as a community you don't permit it. Which means you have to be able to, and women have to stand by women. You have to stand up and say, I saw it happen. You don't agree with the kinds of narratives which say, oh, they were actually in a relationship, she's just trying to take revenge. This kind of thing one hears all the time. And it's surprising to me, you could have been in a relationship and still when you say no, your no means no. You could have been in a 5-year relationship and you can say no, and that no means no. So the fact that someone is in a relationship doesn't mean that anything. So for gender sensitization, which is like a term which I'm not very comfortable with the term gender sensitization because it sounds very governmentalist. It sounds like a governmentality kind of thing. But I know what you mean. How do we use this? So where does the impulse to protect the accused come from? It comes from deeply internalized values, and it comes from trying to side with power. And you have to take a decision like right now, all the new students and the old students, that you will not stand by and watch sexual harassment happen. So yes, you should follow official, but then, and by unofficial, I don't mean lynching, I don't mean encounters. I mean, how do you shame someone so that they feel completely isolated? If they're a sexual harasser, they should be completely isolated. They should have no friends. Nobody should sit with them. Nobody should talk with them, if you know for sure that this has happened. So that's, I think, by talking about these issues more and more, and not only when you have a talk. There have to be groups among yourselves where you talk about how do we build a safe campus. This used to be a very safe campus. And it's become less safe now, but it's still a safer campus than many. So you can make that space that Arunima was talking about, where anyone can go out at whatever time and be safe, right? So that was the first and the third. See, the point that you made, it's interesting that you actually made the argument she's saying is a problem. Because it is not true. I mean, how is it assumed that beheading a man for rape means there are no rapes? Do you think women are completely safe in Middle Eastern countries? No, of course not. They're no more safe than they are in Delhi or in New York. Women are not safe anyway. So you're just assuming that for one rape a man is beheaded and therefore all women are safe. That's not true. It's not certainly not true for Saudi Arabia, where even to drive a car is forbidden. So let's not. You're just imagining that if there are very severe punishments, women feel safe. Let's go find out how safe women are. I'm not saying they're more unsafe. I'm saying women everywhere are unsafe. And so what ties up here is that the severity of punishment has nowhere ensured the safety of women. Nowhere, never. Death penalty is already here. There is a death penalty for rape in this country. We didn't want it, they gave it to us. Take death penalty. What has happened? 90 rapes, as I said, reported per day in 2022. 10 years after, 9 years after that law was passed. So it doesn't, because nobody thinks when they commit a rape that they will be caught. And if they are caught, they know how low the conviction rate is. So some of them have political patrons and they know or they think they will get away. So it's not severity of punishment, but certainty of punishment. That is, there has to be like a time-bound thing. The police have to perform certain acts. If they have not conducted the investigation properly, they have to be just dismissed or suspended. I mean, they have to be suspended at any rate and an inquiry should take place. I shouldn't say dismissed because that's also a very arbitrary act, but they should be suspended and an inquiry should take place. There should be certainty of punishment. So it's not acceptable, in other words, to say that authoritarian countries, women are safe and we should become more authoritarian because more authoritarianism inevitably comes down on the least powerful groups in society. A more authoritarian state will be more anti-Dalit, more anti-religious minority, more anti-women. Authoritarianism has never worked to protect women. So that's...
Bollywood movies and the kinds of stereotypes and terms and ways in which women are characterized, harmful words, images, etc. Now, I want to see Bollywood movies. I don't disagree with you, but I don't think that it starts there. I want to see it more as symptomatic, that it tells us about what becomes more and more acceptable. Now, the thing about Hindi movies is that, love was always characterized, even in the sort of very, very lovely songs we all love to sing. When we look at the video forms of those, there are these guys running after women who don't want to have them chasing after them. So it's all stalking in different ways and all of that. The songs themselves are very beautiful. So, so the thing about, I think, cinema, particularly, is that unless we see it as something that is symptomatic of certain kinds of changes that is actually happening in society, we might end up feeling that cinema instigates this. Then the next thing will be, let's stop women going to the cinema. It will never be, let's stop guys going to the cinema who will keep saying bomb and pataka and so on and so forth. So, so I think that's something we want to keep with us. And, to that, this is a general concern I've had in the last few decades, that there is a certain kind of public acceptability of violence and of different kinds. And now I want to actually speak about social media and socially mediated violence, which is that there is so much of virtual violence against women on platforms like X, which was called Twitter earlier, and you're routinely told that you'll be raped, dismembered, acid thrown on you, people find out your home address and number and all of that, and there's a kind of manner by which you are threatened, right? So you are asked to render yourself invisible. So there is a way in which that I want to use that as a way to think about death penalty, because I think spectacular violence, whether it is in the context of what you do, and there's so much in the public domain now. People are recording it, circulating it, sharing it, all of this is happening. So the death penalty becomes yet another, it's a kind of spectacular form of punishment without any results whatsoever. If nothing else, go and look at the Amnesty International report on this, on the death penalty, and how utterly useless it has been, right? So in that sense, I think when it comes to violence against women and girls and violence against sexual minorities, violence of this kind against minorities of different kinds, I think, but let's just stick with violence against women and girls for now. I think there is a kind of false binary when we set up democracy and authoritarianism. Because there is an assumption that the democratic space should be far more enabling to women, which it isn't. Right? So, Delhi is up there in terms of the statistics on violence against women. Right? It should be. It's a democratic country, after all. Right? We exercise our vote. That's how we understand democracy. So I think there is an issue here that we have to think about. It's very serious. And I want to go back to the question of gender sensitization. And I share Nivedita's anxiety about the term. But alongside with that, I think, see, what I want to add to what she was saying earlier, which is to say that what I would welcome enormously is conversations amongst all of you where we can talk to each other, you can talk to one another. I want to hear more about that. It shouldn't be this one-off thing. How many of you talk to one another about not spectacular cases like a gang rape and murder, or, the ones that we know about, whether it's Hathras or Unnao or Kathua or, these kinds of instances, and most recently this one, but everyday forms of violence. Do you speak about it? Do you speak about the ways in which this might be making the lives of your of women speaking to men, speaking to each other? Does this become an issue at all? Now, if that were to become an issue, I think a lot of this would go forward much more. It has to become part of our everyday reflection, because this is political. Right? This is not something that is an external kind of thing or some, nobody becomes sensitive to anything, right? I mean, very often protest is where we become thoughtful about things, where we start to change our ways of living. So I think it is important to make this a kind of, but you can evolve a new politics around this, a new kind of mode of addressing something like this. And if that becomes possible, I think that a campus such as this, conversations like this can easily become part of our everyday lives and be great. And it would actually change the political culture of this place in the country.
My name is Hafsa. Actually, I wanted to ask you, just like you said, that death penalty is not an effective thing. And with this very layman, lay human sort of understanding of mine, how to ensure that if somebody who has been convicted of an offense of, sexual violence or whatever sort of offense, that the person comes out of the imprisonment and he is, or she, or whoever, this person is a changed human being. I mean, like, there was this case in one of the states where a man had raped a minor, and then he came out after 7 years of imprisonment, and then he raped another minor. So what sort of punishment should be there? What sort of imprisonment should be there, or what should be happening during their, punishment period, that they come out as reformed human beings? And second point would be, second question I wanted to ask was that, what happens when, we have laws for juveniles, that is, they are there, but then when these people who are convicts and who have, done these sort of horrible things, so when they are, on that, they're about to be, they're not juveniles and they are about to be adults, that age where they are almost 18, 19, that sort of thing, how they escape from that, from the punishment. So how to deal with that? Yeah, thank you.
I'm Sushmita. Is normalizing sex or physical urges a way to sort of address this? Because
sex is considered to be very sort of, closed doors affair. There is a burden on women to sort of save themselves, and there is a burden of their entire family on girls that, don't indulge in anything, it will bring shame on the family. So I think this is very, very deeply traumatizing, and this sort of conditioning begins at a very young age. So by the time we reach college, I think we are already deeply conditioned and burdened, and we don't want to further perpetuate any additional stress that we can bring on the family. So is normalizing that sort of that it is normal to have these urges, a way to go about it.
I'm Yusra Aram from Triple S2, and before asking any question, I have my own experiences which I have gone through, and apart from my own experiences, wherever I go, even in the bus stop, even in bus or in hostel, everywhere I go, I try to meet everyone and ask the same questions regarding how they have faced the violence and whatever the minor cases they have been through. And whomsoever I have talked with, I have got, I know until now it is a little experience, but from all of that, I have got a question that most of the girls are hesitant to speak for them. I know what the reason could be, but apart from it, unless until it becomes a matter of great what kind of media case or anything which comes in the limelight, the privileged so-called feminists don't come in the protest. They don't want to be a part of that. They give the excuse that there could be a minor space, there must be a marginal space for men to be a part of us, and we should not exclude them. As you were saying that yes, they say that don't exclude them, as they need their help financially and for coming, as they are in the power, so we need their support. So think that they haven't been through any kind of violence, so it should not be, it is not their matter. So how could we build such kind of empathy in them that we could have the feminine kind of community? For getting that, I would say it would be a revolution for us, even for intellectual level or any kind of it. So how could we do that?
मैम, जैसे आपने कहा कि पनिशमेंट जो है इंश्योर करनी चाहिए इसके लिए ताहिर ताहिर सो जैसे आपने बताया कि पनिशमेंट इंश्योर करना चाहिए कल्प्रिट के लिए, तो फिर हम देखते हैं कि पोस्ट पनिशमेंट उनके लिए सेलिब्रेशन होता है, तो इस सिचुएशन में क्या वो और इनकरेज्ड होगा या डिस्करेज्ड होगा, ये तो मतलब एक क्वेश्चन आता है इस पर। दूसरी बात है कि जब हम कोई प्रोटेस्ट करते हैं किसी सेक्सुअल असॉल्ट के खिलाफ, तो क्या उसमें हम किसी लेंस चीज़ों को देखते हैं? अगर हम देखते हैं कि कोई आदिवासी का रेप हुआ है, तो जिस तरह से आज आरजी कौर के हॉस्पिटल के ये हुआ है, तो इस तरह का मतलब नहीं देखते हैं। या फिर जब हम फॉर एग्जांपल अगर मैं ग्लोबल फिनोमेना में देखूं, तो 7 अक्टूबर के बाद जो सो का सेक्सुअल असॉल्ट एलिगेशंस जो आए थे कि इजरायली वीमेन वेयर रेप्ड एंड किल्ड, जो कि बाद में रिपोर्टेड हुआ है कि मोस्ट ऑफ देम वेयर फेक, बट फिर जब हम देखते हैं कि पैलेस्टीनियन वीमेन आर बीइंग रेप्ड विद अ वीडियोग्राफी, बट हम उस तरह के आउटरीच नहीं देखते हैं वेस्ट में, यहाँ तक के ईस्ट में भी। तो क्या हम जो एक रेस या कास्ट या रिलीजियन का लेंस लगाते हैं, तो क्या इससे एक वीमेन के नज़रिए से ना देखना, उसके साथ उसकी दूसरी आइडेंटिटी जोड़ देना, एक क्राइम को सिर्फ क्राइम से ना देखना, उसके साथ दूसरे जो आइडेंटिटीज़ है उस आइडेंटिटी को जोड़ करके देखना कैसा है और उसको कैसे एड्रेस किया जाएगा?
Hello. Ma'am, So this question of what sort of imprisonment for rape accused and what kind of punishment should there be? It's a difficult question. It's not that it's an easy, intuitive kind of thing. But there are two things that I want to say as a quick response to this. One is, I actually haven't seen enough data on what happens to men who have been imprisoned for rape when they come out, what their behavior is like. Right? And alongside with that, I want to simply say this as a footnote to this. I want to also say that in large parts of the world, there's also a big discussion going on about prisons, prison reforms, the kind of life within prisons, violence within prisons, and so on and so forth, and all of that, right? So it is true, we do want punishment. We often think of prisons as the answer to that. But the question then becomes, if you are going to go into a highly violent situation where other kinds of forms of violation continue there, would you become a different kind of human being? I don't know. But forget the prison. If one is to actually go back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is to think about the home as the kind of site for socializing, I mean, the fact that you raped or attacked, you didn't do that when you came out of the prison, you did that without going there first, right? So there are various places where you are being, you are changing, right? Where you think that these kinds of ways of being are acceptable. You have a kind of acceptability around increasing kinds of forms of brutalization, violence, etc., for any number of reasons, of which one is that there isn't quick punishment and quick justice and so on and so forth. So, I can't give you an easy answer saying, okay, make it 20 years and they'll be different. Or make it 30 years or never let them out, let it be life, etc., etc. It's not an easy answer. Right? But I think that there might be, I think it's a serious question. And I think we have to start thinking about this. And we must do that not in an abstraction, where we assume that as soon as the person comes out, he will do this again. There are two things about that. One, of course, that you assume that every offender is a repeat offender, which need not be the case. The second, of course, is that it's a way of silencing and making women quiet. Because if you complain, then this is what will happen to you. So then women don't complain at all. So there is that too. This idea that the complaint will lead to more violence and so on. So there's a kind of culture of fear that we ourselves build and perpetuate. So there's something that we have to do to perhaps try and break that. But thank you. I think it's a very, very important question. As far as, I think the thing about sex and rape, as any number of feminists and others who are concerned about, the human rights of women, particularly in relation to rape, have said repeatedly that it's an act of power rather than an act of sex. Right? So let's just take this recent instance. It was hardly, some man having sex with this woman. Right? To begin with, of course, it is against her will. And then, of course, any number of other things over and above that. Right? So if that is and then she is brutalized to such an extent, and in many, many cases of gang rape and spectacular violence of this kind, we find that the body is marked again and again in such a way that it is actually about inflicting pain and showing one's power. So if that is indeed the case, then these two they don't lead from one to the other. I agree with you. I am sex positive enough to say that yes, I think it is important to have safe forms of sex possible in society. But I think that's a separate and very serious conversation. I do not think that these are linked to one another. I got a bit confused with the next question which ended with some kind of which had to do with privileged feminists not going for protests and various things of that kind. So I'm going to leave that to Nivedita, mainly because I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry. But I do think that it's important to protest, and I do think that the histories of protests in this country will show us that very many different kinds of feminists have protested. So, but I didn't quite get the question. So, so in terms of making a sort of a comfortable feminine space, yes, that is very necessary and urgent. But how one goes about that, there are various ways to think about that. But since I didn't quite get the question, I'm obviously not answering it. This business about, do we look at social location in relation to how we respond to rape? My answer is yes and no. I think it's extremely important to think about social location because it tells us about the enactment of power and why the bodies of some women are utilized in order to enact racial or religious or other kinds of forms of violence. Why do women's bodies become the kind of site for that? We have to think about that. But those women's bodies are the site for that. And with that, I think that also then speaks to the fact that we do need to respond to every girl and woman who's raped or violated. It's not, I think that it is not productive. I'm not saying that social hierarchies and social differences will disappear because of this, but I think it is because women are a very peculiar minority in that sense, right? And precisely for that reason, and in terms of the kinds of experience of violence, women across the board do experience violence. So as a result of that, I think it is productive only to some extent. And when it becomes a question of why were there protests for this and why were there not any protests for this, the answer is that you will see in recent times, in the last 3 or 4 years, there were some situations, the Hathras incident, a horrible situation, where there were immense amount of protests that did happen. So what is it that triggers anger and public protest? I think that is a very important thing for us to think about. But I think it is too simple to say that, it's only when you are socially privileged, if you're a socially privileged woman, that protests take place. I think that would be a very, very limited way to think about it. I think also that in terms of the kind of rape culture free world that we want to build, that would not be the right way to start.
So actually Arunima has answered the questions in almost exactly the way I would have. So I'll just pick up 1 or 2 themes. One has to do with prison reform, Hafsa's question. And so I want to reiterate that we don't think about what happens inside prisons once people go there. Now, in the context of sexual violence, it may seem strange to say this, but the fact is that the large majority of people in prison are Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims. In other words, the most marginalized and very, very poor men and women, and very poor women. So it's the most poor, most marginalized men and women in this country or anywhere who end up in prison. And prison is a brutalizing space. Prison is not a space where you learn to become a better human being. Prison is utterly brutal, utterly violent, and you will only come out of that place more violent and more brutal than you were. So in a feminist understanding of rape, it's not enough to stop and send him to prison. We have to have a larger idea of prison reform, of what prisons should do, what is the point of prisons. We should work towards things like that. So we need to keep in mind that prisons is not the end of the story. We have a bigger responsibility than punishing the rapist. If we are feminists, we have huge responsibilities. And those responsibilities have to ask, why are the poorest, most marginal people filling prisons in this country and elsewhere? And what is that space like? So that's one theme that I want to pick up. The other theme I want to pick up, which ran across 2 questions, Sushmita's and I think you said Tahir, right? Is about rape is not about sex, it's about violence. It's something that is a formula that we have imbibed since the 1980s. Rape is not about desire. Rape is not about sex. Rape is about establishing dominance. So when you talk about Adivasi, so when you talk about, so what is this kind of mass rape of women in the Palestine situation, in communal violence, in India, large numbers of women are raped, Dalit women are routinely raped to teach the community a lesson. So the women are seen as the repository of the community's honor, and you're punishing the community by raping their women. So it's about power. It is not about sex. It is a mistake to think that rape is about sex. So I agree with Arunima that of course we should normalize safe, consensual sex. Of course we should normalize it. But that is not the answer. Your question was, is that the answer? That's not the answer to ending sexual violence, because sexual violence is not coming about because of sexual desire. Sexual violence is about power. And the third theme, I'm going to take your question as about how to build empathy. You asked the question, how to build empathy. I also didn't understand what you meant. Privileged feminists don't join protests. Feminists are the ones who organize protests. We have a very, very long history of protest in this country. But you said how to build empathy. And how to build empathy is by talking. Talking, conversing, not finishing this and just going off and now forgetting about it till the next talk, but have reading groups, have discussion groups, talk to one another, ask one another, what do we want in a safe campus? Kind of something like a rules of conduct from below, not rules of conduct given to you by the administration, but what will you as a collectivity, as a collective, what are the rules of conduct you want from one another? How should we be with one another? I'm using rules of conduct deliberately because it's used in that very top-down way. But there could be a very bottom-up way of telling one another how should we live with one another, how should we talk to one another. That's how empathy would be built. Maybe we can just take one more round of 4 questions and be done.
Hello ma'am, my name is Sharmista Kumari from Sociology, third semester. Ma'am, I want to ask you ma'am, don't you think that the justice should be delivered proportionately? Like in this case, in this the brutal rape case of Kolkata, we saw that that brutality is reached to that peak. And in this case, if the punishment is quite low, then it will again promote the others to do so. So in both ways, it is like if we don't go for the death penalty, it's okay, ma'am. But if the punishment will be low, then again it will promote the others to do. So don't you think so, ma'am? Is it? And you talked about that it is not a isn't it a psychological act, ma'am? Is it or any other factors behind it? The one who rapes. So, ma'am, this kind of question. That's all, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Garima Singh. Ma'am, my question somewhat pertains to what she has said. Ma'am, last week I read a book, The Last Girl. This book is the autobiography of Nadia Murad. She was a survivor from the Islamic States, and she was treated as a slave, and she was raped, and a number of atrocities was committed against her. What the global community did was giving her a Nobel Prize, but what she said in her speech is that I do not need a prize, I need protection for my community. So when we as ma'am said that when punishment, this rape is more of an exercise of power, so should not the punishment be coercive or as a precedent for people for fear mongering or a kind of fear that they are not going to do it again?
Hello ma'am, I'm Tanya, and I want to ask that the thing you said that how as a community, as a society, we should respond to these situations when these happen. So what I've noticed is that what you said that social isolation might work in these cases, but it is as difficult doing it in practice than said easily. Because what people, especially in case of men, what is done is it is very easy to separate their personal lives from their professional lives or their academic lives. And people very easily depend their character, like he might be of a slimy character, but he is a good professor, or he is an academician, or he is whatever. And if something is done against him, then his career might be destroyed, we might lose a good scholar and things like that. And moreover, as normal students, as normal community, what I've seen is people don't want to displease anybody for a case that is not directly related to them. Though it is easy to maintain a safe distance, or let's not get involved only, let whoever is involved deal with whatever these things is going on. And the second thing is that I want to ask that what an effective gender sensitization should look like, because the bunch I have been to are like traumatizing. They put all the onus of on the women only. Ki be vigilant, don't go, don't run into bad men, don't go to these places, and what were you doing, and things like that. So. It's like be vigilant, keep your sixth sense on, and have a sixth sense always.
One last. Yeah, ma'am, I'm Garima Jain. I'm from CPS. Actually, my question is regarding the fact that are we not looking at gender sensitization the wrong way? And my question comes from the context of school education that we get for like 12 years, and that school education, in my observation, has not been gender sensitized at all, and it is a culture of shaming by a fellow teachers, fellow students, and a culture of acceptance of the fact that there is a good girl, bad girl kind of thinking, and this goes on to perpetuate the mindset that if a girl is a bad in their opinion or whatever, then whatever has been happened to her is justified or something like that. And also the fact that a very large number of students don't go for higher education, or even if they go for higher education, it is not in the institutes such as JNU or DU, so that they don't get that kind of exposure, so that they don't get the sort of unlearning that happens to students, So in that sense, are we not looking at gender sensitization from a very university perspective, and not from a perspective where the students actually need to, they develop their character and personalities, etc. Thank you.
Hello ma'am, I'm Lakshita. I just want to ask that it is okay to talk about women, I also do, but if we see false cases, so it goes against it goes against feminism, because we do talk about male also, and the thing is it make weak the true cases where there are really rape, where there are really sexual harassment. But because of such a false cases, it makes like कि ऐसे तो ऐसे ही कर दिया होगा, या फिर ये तो blame कर रही है, या फिर जो भी. So what about what should be the mechanism to ensure there must not be false cases? And the second question, I am confused that should I ask or not. Actually, I searched a lot on Google and websites, but I didn't find what are the laws or the legal provision there which ensures there must not be sexual harassment or rape with men. So if you have any idea, so you can share with us. Thank you.
Hello ma'am, I am Pushparaj.
Hello ma'am, I am Shivam from CSP, and as you have mentioned the issue about the labor force participation, the low labor force. As you have mentioned, the low labor force participation in India, and my question is, ma'am, I'm very surprised that as our country has a very rich history about the feminism and a great philosophy also, so why India has a very low labor force participation of about 32 or 33 as compared to Bangladesh. Our neighbor have 47 or 48, and even the communist China, have about 60 to 70% of the labor force participation, ma'am. So my question is, ma'am, ki how we get out of this low labor force participation, and how we should ensure more and more workforce participation of women in the mainstream. Okay.
Last thing I want to say that in this campus itself, that as of now we are discussing of the women's safety in campuses and around, but in this campus itself we witness a very like sexual harassment thing happened just few months back, and eventually she is my friend and she is running around court, and she is like every day I ask her what's going on. She is having like she registered about that, and in that resistance she is having fine over her. She is running to court and she is not able to register this semester till now, and like these things are happening. Myself, like we were protesting here. I was there for the 8-day hunger strike to ensure GS cash in this campus. Somebody from administration comes and just says that ICC is there and it's a government body and it's from government and we can't do anything. So as of now, like ICC is there, but ICC is not able to give like ensure safety for the women in this campus. Like right now, like we see that even the ICC is there, but the women are like not safe and they have to go to court to have like to find the justice for herself. Thank you.
Okay, Sharmishta, proportionate punishment. The 2012 rapists were hanged. Were they hanged? The 2012 gang rape in Delhi, they were hanged. How did it act as a deterrent? I'm saying this again and again. It happened in 2012. The figures that I have are for 2022, but routinely 100 rapes a day are reported. It does not act as a deterrent. How many times can we say this to you? My point is that you don't know what families want, first of all. Let the family think about what they want. They may want their daughter back. They may not want somebody hanged. But the point is that we don't do what families want. That is not what a society is based on. Families want a lot of things. Families want to keep their daughters at home and never let them go out, right? So when all of you keep saying, for some reason, this myth remains in your mind, this entire 2 hours, we're giving you facts. With the actual existence of the death penalty on the statute books, with rapists being hanged, rape is still happening every single day. So the point is not hard punishment and harsh punishment. It does not stop, it does not act as a deterrent. What about these guys? They knew the other guys were hanged. They think, everyone thinks they can get away. So we have to make sure nobody gets away. There should be a punishment. There would be clear, specific, if there is physical harm, this kind of punishment. If there's sexual violence plus physical harm, that kind of punishment. There would be gradations of punishment. That's what a good law should look like. Not what you are saying is a kind of, and not you, but many of you are saying harsh punishment. It's a kind of very medieval mindset where you think ki haath kaato, sar kaato, sab theek ho jayega. Nahi ho jayega theek. There will be that kind of violence, so we have to, what do we as feminists have to fight for? Certainty of punishment, certainly proportionate punishment, that can be in the law. What is the proportion of punishment? So I think, please stop thinking that death penalty will stop rape, because death penalty has not stopped rape. People have been hanged for rape and people are still raping. Garima, you said, about the person who said, I need protection, not a prize. Where's Garima? Yeah, protection, not a prize. Of course, I think that's what anybody would say, that I don't, many people, many activists, disability rights activists, many feminists say, I'm tired of being called brave. I don't want to be brave, I just want to be an ordinary person. But we're forced to be brave in this world. So I agree with her. Tanya, you're right. I think I take the first part of what you said as, actually both of what you said as comments rather than questions. you're right, there is a tendency to say he's a good father and professor, he may be a sexual harasser, but he writes excellent articles. There is an issue here. You can enjoy and learn from his excellent articles, but he should still be punished for sexual harassment. That's what I would say. So I would not say don't read him. Read him if he has something important or interesting to say about international relations or the economy or whatever, but he should be punished for sexual harassment, whether it's a student. And this whole point of men's careers will be ruined if they are punished is something we have to fight, because women who face sexual harassment and sexual violence are deeply traumatized. Their careers are already affected because they are not able to function in the way that they wanted to function. So why is a man's career more important than the trauma that a woman has gone through? And you should have thought about it when you were sexually harassing someone. You should have, and imagine what sort of careers they will have. What sort of IAS officers will they become? What sort of civil servants will they become? What sort of professors will these men become? Who are harassing their classmate, what will they do when the person is their subordinate? So their career should be affected, actually, right? So I mean, that's a, and you're saying that gender sensitization tends to be terrifying. I think there's a razor's edge. There is a way in which authorities tend to say stay home, etc., and place the responsibility on the victim. But I can also imagine, I don't know exactly what situations you're talking about, but I can imagine a students' organization also giving you tips, right? That tips on how to deal with sexual violence. I can imagine that is sort of a plan B. Ideally, we should have a campus where we don't need such tips. But I guess if it's a students' organization, perhaps the intention was also to say we should also be alert. But I do agree with you that that can't be gender sensitization. That is some kind of practical tip, accepting that this is an unsafe campus, which is heartbreaking to hear. Right? It's heartbreaking to hear that JNU is now so unsafe that you're given tips on how to escape sexual violence from strangers. And that is, I would not call that gender sensitization in any form. That is about telling women how to protect themselves in an unsafe space. And we may not want to do that. So I think both of your comments are very important. It's not too late in university. Start where you are. When you say something like this, it's like यहाँ से शुरू करने से कोई फायदा नहीं, स्कूल में करना नहीं, जहाँ आप हैं वहाँ कीजिए. 50-60 नहीं, there's no counter thing. We both have other appointments. When you say that it has to be unlearned, I can unlearn now at the age of 64. You think you can't unlearn at the age of 21? Of course, everybody can unlearn at any stage. And let us not do this thing of we should start before. Yes, we should start before, but start where you are. Start where you are with your 55-year-old father, with your 25-year-old brother, with your sisters, with your mother, with your grandmother. Start where you are. Don't think of what could have been done earlier. After you've sorted this out, you can think about schools. I agree with you. There should be this thing in schools. Why is labor force participation low? It does have a lot to do with Shivam. It does, of course, have a lot to do with patriarchy. It does have a lot to do with access. It has to do with unemployment. If there is very high unemployment, the few jobs that are there will be taken by men because men are assumed to be the breadwinners, etc. So in a situation of general unemployment, workforce participation of women will be low. But for me, the question is not how to raise labor workforce participation of women. The question is how to ensure that women have the capacity and the resources to be independent, to be economically independent, to take their own decisions. So you see what it is when you say labor force participation. That's like thinking of humans in terms of resources. But if you think from the feminist point of view, yes, women should be able to take up work, but if that means that they're going to be, it's just a huge double burden, that's not enough. It's not enough for us to say women should be participating in productive production and not just reproduction. We have to say the whole thing. It's like with prisons. We have to say everything. We have to say end the sexual division of labor, socialization of childcare, socialization of reproductive services. It's a package deal. It's not one thing. Labor force participation is the problem of the state. I'm not concerned with that because that's one of the arguments. Then we'll have more people, cheaper labor. higher labor force participation by women ensures cheaper labor because there's a larger labor pool. That can't be our concern as feminists, right? So we have to ask the questions differently. And yes, I don't know what to say to you. The ICC is ineffective. The ICCs in most places are ineffective. There's sexual violence now in JNU or at a level at which we have not experienced. We've both been here since the 80s, Arunima and I, and we've known JNU as a campus for decades. And this is a new and terrifying phenomenon, and we have to fight it together. And we can't expect immediate success, and we can't. As you know, this is a microcosm of a much larger political formation which has been authoritarian and anti-minority and anti-women. So we're fighting all that. So it's a fight. There's no easy answer.
I'm only going to address one question because I think all the others have been done wonderfully by Nivedita, I would leave it. I think this question about, how do we ensure that there are no false cases? I think we start with the assumption that all cases that women bring must be treated seriously. We do not start with an assumption that we are some kind of lie detector where we say that, that might have been untrue, this is actually going to be true. How do we make that assessment, right? So it is only by taking the case on and then doing the necessary procedures in order to verify whether the allegation was true or not. How can you assume right at the outset that some might be true and some might be false, right? I think that's a very, very dangerous idea for the simple reason that that's the best way to stop women from filing complaints. And I have heard students telling me that even in recent times on this campus they have been told that how do you know there can always be another side to the same thing, right? Of course there are many sides. That is the whole point of adjudication. You want to hear what the information is. What is it that the person who's accused, what does that, it's not that one is saying that whoever is accused should be punished immediately. That's hardly the point. The point is that some kind of acceptable process must take place in order to ascertain whether the case was true or not. And the chances are 95 or more % of the times for women to pluck up enough courage to go out and actually file a case, it has to be true. We have to also sort of remember that they need our support for having done what many of us may not have done at another time. Right? So let's start with that assumption that free and fair processes take place, that sexual harassment cases are taken seriously, that GS caches are brought back, that there is a kind of speedy, I think what is actually far more serious than any of this true-false thing is how to expedite it quickly. Right? I think one of the reasons why women who have filed have felt depressed and disheartened is because it has gone on for too long, the whole process. So there has, we have to review. We have to think about ways in which it can be better. Surely there are. But I do not think that we should start with the assumption that there are false cases and there are true cases and we are called upon to actually, in the word go, decide whether something is true or false. But thank you so much. And for everybody who lasted out.
You made another point. Thank you for discussing the false case argument. But you also raised the question about violence against men, sexual violence against men. And it is true that sexual violence, that is, men can also be raped, and men and trans people face sexual violence. And it's not as visible because if women are ashamed to report rape, the rapes are by other men. The rapists are men. The victim/survivor can be male or female, but largely they're female, but they can be trans and men. And we have to also make that visible, and we have to discuss it as an issue in the law. But the reason why it's also somewhat sidelined is because trans people are generally also, this links up with the question about class and the location. So trans people are also usually, let's say hijras are routinely raped. They are, actually on the margins of society. And imagine if it is shameful for a woman to say she was raped, how shameful it is for a man to say he's raped. So then it becomes more difficult for a man who's raped to accept that he was raped. So no, it's good that you brought that up, and I think we do need to recognize that those who are raped can also be men and trans people, although it's largely women and girls.
Context where that happens is custodial rape of men and boys and war. Right? We've had many such instances. So I think it's a very serious issue. It's not that it's not serious, but again, something at the risk of repetition for 2 hours, for us to say that feminists have been addressing those questions. And for those of you who are interested, if nothing else, please do read Angela Davis's autobiography, because she is somebody who has been militating for prison reform and rethinking the prison. And she is an exemplary feminist in that regard, and who has addressed many of these kinds of questions. Thank you so much.